Hey everybody, this is Patrick Costas. So I just wanted to give you a little warning about this video. This is probably definitely the hardest video I've ever done. Um, I had to do a lot of research on what happened in this horrible event, and it affected me. I have to be honest. So I just wanted to kind of issue out that warning and let you know that there's going to be some graphic descriptions of what this animal did in there, and there's also going to be some strong language. So I just wanted to warn you about that. The reason I do these timeline videos is because I think it's very important that we understand what really happened in these horrible events, and I also think that in order for there to be justice for the victims, we have to prevent any of these crazy conspiracy theories and all that going in there and causing a bunch of consternation and causing more needless suffering for the victims who need resolution to these type of events. So that's why I do these, is to try to get the record straight for what actually happened. But this one was very, very difficult. I've worked a lot on the Las Vegas Massacre, and that was hard to do. But this one is especially difficult. I went on their website for this Baptist church that's in Sutherland there, and I went on their website, and I had seen pictures of, they released the name of the victims today, and I saw pictures of some of the children that had passed away. But when I went on the church's website just to research some, what they do and things like that, I saw a lot of pictures from their Halloween party, I guess it was, and some parties they did a couple weeks ago, or very recently. And I saw the children, some of the same children that I'd seen that are now dead. I saw that they had passed away in those pictures with their parents and friends and everything like that. And it's hard. It really is. America's really lost its way, where people would do something like this. I don't understand the evil that I don't understand how evil a person. How can you be so evil that you would do things like this? I just don't understand it. But I just wanted everybody to know that this is going to be a very hard one to listen to. And I just want everybody to know that viewer discretion is advised.
The murderer in this horrible event was Devin Kelly, a 26-year-old loser who beat children's skulls in and beat and stalked women. That will be the last time you will hear his name in this video. The rest of the time he will be referred to as the murderer. This murderer should have never been allowed to purchase the weapon he used in the massacre. The murderer was given a bad conduct discharge from the United States Air Force for beating his wife and fracturing his stepson's skull. The assault occurred in 2012. He was court-martialed, found guilty, and reduced to the rank of Airman Basic and placed in confinement for 1 year. Before this creature was convicted, he had actually escaped from a mental health facility.
He once escaped from a mental institution. The news is just one of the latest troubling things we're learning about the suspect behind Sunday's deadly shooting at a small Texas church that killed 26 people. Correspondent Matt Finn has the story from Sutherland Springs.
An El Paso police report states the Texas church shooter escaped from a New Mexico mental health facility in 2012. Police responded to a bus stop where a witness said the shooter was a danger to himself and planned to take a bus out of state. Police took him into custody. Authorities also now confirm they have the shooter's cell phone but can't get into it, so it's being sent to Quantico. The FBI also confirms the shooter was not flagged in its databases.
Apparently, the Air Force had sent the murderer to a mental hospital after he was caught sneaking weapons onto a military base in order to carry out death threats made against his military superiors. After escaping from the mental hospital, he went to a bus terminal in El Paso, Texas, about 7 miles away from the hospital. Police were dispatched to the bus station. They took him into custody. In the police report about this incident, it was written that the murderer intended to take the bus out of state. Officers wrote that the murderer was a danger to himself and to others. The murderer was released from confinement after serving his 1-year sentence in 2014. Also in 2014, the murderer had police called to his residence on suspicion of domestic violence on his then girlfriend. Later, she would become his second wife. Also in 2014, the murderer was charged with misdemeanor animal cruelty in Colorado after a neighbor reported him for beating a dog. Initially, the murderer refused to speak with officers. He then denied beating the animal, but was ordered to pay almost $370 in restitution. In 2015, the murderer was the focus of a protection order issued in Colorado. Also, it has been revealed he pursued a sexual relationship with a 13-year-old girl when he was over 18 years of age. He also asked the 13-year-old girl to live in his house with his wife and be their topless maid. He stalked this young lady for years. It also appears he was investigated for a sexual assault in 2012. Despite the mountain of evidence that this freak should never be allowed to purchase weapons because he's obviously violent, unstable, and a walking time bomb, he was, however, allowed to buy multiple firearms, including a Ruger AR-15 he purchased last year. The reason why this maniac was able to buy these weapons is because the United States Air Force failed to submit his criminal history to the FBI as required by federal rules. So when the background checks were performed, no flags were raised. Thus, the purchases were allowed to go forward. The murderer lived in New Braunfels, which is about 35 miles from the church that he targeted. Shockingly, the murderer had recently started a job as an unarmed security guard at a nearby resort. The church he attacked is the First Baptist Church of Sutherland Springs. Sutherland Springs is a small town with one stoplight. Population is approximately 400. The murderer's in-laws sometimes went to this church. The murderer had apparently been there himself, perhaps as recently as this last Halloween.
Also, we learned that the shooter came here to this site with his children on Halloween night for a fall festival, and parishioners at the time thought that was a good sign. They were hoping that he had maybe made up with his in-laws, and obviously that did not happen, as a few days later he would return with guns here.
His motive for attacking the church is unclear. The murderer vehemently hated Christianity and promoted atheism. Recently, his Facebook rants against religion became too much for many of his online friends who unfollowed him. It has been revealed that he recently sent threatening text messages to his mother-in-law. While the police have not given a definitive motive, they have stated it was not motivated by politics or religion. Given that his in-laws were not in the church at the time of the attack, this leads me to believe the police may be premature on stating his hatred of religion didn't play a part in this evil act. At approximately 11:20 a.m. on November 5th, the murderer was seen at a Valero service station across the street from the church. He was seen wearing heavy black tactical type gear. Later, it would be revealed the murderer was wearing a bulletproof vest. The murderer then drove his Ford Expedition to the church. Worship services began at 11 a.m. and were already in progress when the murderer arrived. The murderer put on a skull mask, exited his car, leaving the engine on and the door open. The church routinely videotaped its sermons.
Bless the Lord. We're going to lift the Lord up in praise together. We're going to sing Happiness is the Lord. If you'd like to stand with us, we're going to lift the Lord up in praise together.
Law enforcement has confirmed the church was videotaping services that day and recorded the entire attack. At approximately 11:25 a.m., the murderer opened fire with his AR-15 from outside the church. He then entered the church and announced, "Everybody die, motherfucker." He went up and down the aisle 15 to 20 times, executing people for 7 minutes. He executed babies that cried at point-blank range.
One 73-year-old Sunday school teacher talks about holding another woman's hand as she was shot 4 times in the torso and died. Again, I want to go back to the church again as we toss to the next soundbite here in a second, just to give you the look of the flags, the Christian flag at half-staff, the American flag at half-staff, the Texas flag at half-staff. Another woman inside who survived, her husband also survived. Talk about just the brutality of what went on as that man walked up and down the pews and continued to fire.
Everybody started screaming, yelling. Everybody got down, crawling under, wherever they could hide. It was so scary, and that man was shooting. He was shooting hard. And I could feel the gunshots. I saw them on the carpet because they have carpet in there. I could see the gunshots, coming down.
I don't know what kind of evil, Dana, it takes for a man to do this, to shoot innocent people in a church, but to shoot crying babies, to shoot people pulling out their cell phones, and then to go back down the pews and finish off people, as one witness says, that were still begging for life in some cases.
We spoke to the son of 73-year-old Farida Brown. She is in the hospital recovering from 4 gunshot wounds. David Brown gave us a harrowing, detailed account of what his mother witnessed and saw as she was sitting in the last row of the church closest to the entrance.
Shooter entered, and the school teacher sitting to her right yelled, "Get on the floor." So she got on the floor. The lady to her left got on the floor, and then he proceeded to walk up and down the aisle. She said about 10-15 times, shooting everybody that was laying on the ground. And she laid on the ground the whole time and watched his boots walk up and down, and then he eventually did a circle and then ended up at her pew. And the lady to her left, he started shooting her repeatedly. And so she held her hand, and the lady was crying a lot, and she told her, "You're going to be okay, you're going to heaven." And then he stopped shooting her, and then she knew it was her turn, so she started praying for God to take her to heaven. And
We heard one survivor say that he point blank would just shoot babies that cried.
Yes, yeah. Any noise at all, whether it was babies or kids or moms pleading for their kids' lives.
The murderer left at least 15 empty magazines at the church, suggesting he fired approximately 450 bullets at the scene. A local resident, Stephen Wilford, was alerted by his daughter about the shooting. He went into his safe and grabbed his own AR-15 and grabbed some bullets. And he headed out barefoot for the church. He loaded a magazine as he went. As the shooter left the church, Wilford took cover behind a truck. The two exchanged fire. Wilford, an NRA shooting instructor, hit the murderer, causing him to drop his AR-15 and retreat back to his vehicle. Wilford continued firing at the murderer, shooting out his windows. The murderer managed to drive away, firing another weapon out the driver's side window. Wilford hit the murderer twice, once in the leg and a perfect shot in the torso that went right between the two bulletproof plates. The murderer made his escape down State Highway 539. Mr. Wilford went to a vehicle that was at a nearby intersection and had witnessed what was going on, and it was driven by Johnny Langendorf. Mr. Williford asked Mr. Langendorf to follow the shooter after he briefly described what had happened.
I pulled up on the intersection and I saw the shooter coming from the cars actually right outside the church that were parked. His vehicle was parked, door open, engine running, and him and the neighbor across the street were both coming out about the same time, exchanging fire. And as he came up, I never got a look at him. I never really saw him. I saw the gunfire. The shooter got in his truck. The gentleman with the rifle came to my truck as the shooter took off, and he briefed me quickly on what had just happened and said that we had to get him, and so that's what I did.
Speeds reached as high as 90 to 95 miles per hour as the pair raced to catch up to the murderer. After about 10 minutes, the pair caught up to the murderer. The pair called 911 and relayed the shooter's location. At some point during this time, the murderer called his father and told him that he had been shot and he did not think he would live. The murderer's vehicle slowed down and hit a sign near the Wilson County, Guadalupe County line. The murderer's vehicle then sped up again before overturning in a nearby ditch. Williford got out of Langendorf's vehicle, placed his rifle over the hood, and ordered the murderer out of the vehicle. There was no response. The police arrived about 5 minutes later. The murderer had crashed nearly 10 miles away from the site of the massacre. Later, the murderer was found to have died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Mr. Langendorf took this video of the scene.
He hasn't got out and run or nothing. He might be laid down. Because like I said, I ain't seen nobody get out. And we were low on gas. We don't know. I was coming out of the convenience store. I come around that corner. Yeah. I came out of the big key one and I went the back way. And I come right up on him. They were having their gunfight. He jumped in and took off. Like he had literally just walked out of the church. I don't know. No, that's the guy who he had to shoot off. That's the guy who shot out his window. What a jackass. Just the brake light on. All of a sudden.
Brake light was on?
Yeah. No, the gentleman right there on the guardrail. He put a lot of rounds through that guy's vehicle. Shot out the windows. I mean, a lot of rounds. No, whenever he was up at the church. He's in like full tactical gear. No chance. I think the guy's already hurt pretty bad. Like I said, him and this gentleman exchanged a bunch of rounds, and this is as far as we got.
How old are you, Steve?
55.
Where do you live at? What's your home address? Okay. Okay. So you think you may have shot him?
I can't think of any other reason why he took that sign out and ended up in that ditch.
Okay.
I know I put some well-placed shots. I got
Yes.
an EOTech on an AR, and I think they were well-placed shots.
Okay. And that took place in Sutherland Springs area, or?
That's my house,
Okay.
right across from the church. I was home when I heard the shots, and I didn't know what was going on.
Right.
So I had to, God, I had to get in my safe.
Okay. But this guy was at a high rate of speed when he was coming.
Yes, and then he started slowing down this way.
Okay.
He stopped for.
This man was on the corner.
Okay.
And I chased him, and this man, he was on the corner,
right,
with his truck, and I don't even know you, man. And I said, thank you so much. I said, that's the guy. Jumped in the truck with him, and
right.
we gave chase.
What is your last name?
Langendorf.
What is your first name?
Johnny.
What's your date of birth?
10690.
Okay. Where do you live at?
I live at.
Okay, in what city are you out of? Okay, just sit tight, okay? You don't mind. If you can help him, if you can use your phone to call his wife.
Let me call my wife and my family.
26 precious, innocent human beings were murdered in this tragedy. Victims ranged in age from 77 years old to 18 months old. One child was murdered while still in their mother's stomach. Perhaps all of the sorrow would have never happened if the Air Force followed the law. And I say that as a retired non-commissioned officer from the United States Air Force. Maybe if the Air Force leadership spent more time ensuring airmen do their jobs rather than investigating fake hate crimes, these beautiful people may still be alive.